The last thing I remember before the world went quiet was the look on my mother-in-law's face. I'll introduce her as Diana, a woman whose smile was a weapon and whose approval was a currency my husband desperately craved. Her victorious smirk, the one she'd been wearing all night, was melting into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Her eyes, wide and disbelieving, were fixed on the official government letterhead resting on the polished mahogany between us. The clinking glasses and smug chatter had evaporated, replaced by a thick, ringing silence that felt heavier than any sound. Across the table, my husband, Leo, stood frozen. His phone, which had been greedily recording my expected humiliation just moments before, was slowly lowered, its screen dark. But it didn't start there, of course. It started 12 hours earlier, amidst the suffocating opulence of my own 31st birthday party. The event was hosted at Diana's home, a place where worth was measured in stock, prices and social connections, two areas where I was always found lacking. Diana was holding court, her audience of sycophants hanging on every word. She raised a champagne flute, the crystal catching the light. She delivered a long, glowing tribute to Leo's latest triumph at his finance. Firm, a big win that secured his place as the family's brightest star. Then, her gaze fell on me. "And to Clara," she said, her voice dripping with a false sweetness that was sharper than any insult. The crowd turned. Who proves that even the most stable of government admin jobs has its place. She paused for effect, letting the condescension land. "We're all so glad you have your quiet little career to keep you busy." A wave of polite, pitying chuckles rippled through the room. It was the same laughter I heard when I chose a state university over an Ivy League, the same dismissive tone from a dozen other holidays and dinners. Leo just patted my shoulder, a gesture that felt less like comfort and more like a gentle reminder to stay in my place. A restraint. A cold, clean fury settled in my chest. It wasn't hot or loud. It was the quiet, precise anger of a final calculation being made. She thought she was delivering a harmless little jab, a reminder of my place in her world. She had no idea she was mocking the very foundation of a life she couldn't comprehend. To understand why a simple sheet of paper with a DC address could shatter their universe, you have to understand the two lives I was living. To really understand the two lives I was living, you have to understand the narrative my husband's family had written for me. At the center of that universe was my mother-in-law, Diana, a woman whose entire identity was a reflection of her son's achievements and her carefully curated social standing. And orbiting her was my husband, Leo, the charismatic golden boy who was brilliant in his career, but deeply insecure, constantly needing his mother's validation like a plant needs sunlight. Their world was built on a foundation of his success and my quiet, supportive presence in the background. It was a role I never auditioned for, but one I was cast in the moment I said I do. I remember one family dinner with perfect, painful clarity. It was about a year before the birthday party. Leo had just announced a major promotion, and the room erupted. My father-in-law gave a booming toast, champagne was poured, and Diana looked at her son with a reverence usually reserved for saints. It was a celebration of legacy, of a future secured. Later, when the excitement had settled into a low hum, I tried to share a piece of my own news. I mentioned, somewhat shyly, that I'd received a formal commendation from my Department for Logistical Excellence during a crisis. A brief, polite silence fell over the table. Diana just smiled, patted my hand, and asked, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Did you help organize the catering?" The table chuckled, and Leo squeezed my knee underneath, a silent signal to just let it go. And I did. I always did. But in my mind, that question about the catering filed itself away next to all the other little dismissals. It sat next to the time they called my degree in international relations a fun little hobby, and the time they assumed my business trip to Geneva was for a secretarial conference. It was in that moment I first heard them use the nickname that would define my existence in their world, Cubicle Clara, the reliable, boring paper pusher, a sensible and stable accessory for their rising star, a footnote in the grand story of their son. But my reality was a universe away from their perception. I wasn't a paper pusher. I was a special agent with the Diplomatic Security Service, the DSS. While Diana was comparing designer bags at the country club, my days were spent in full tactical gear at a training facility, the weight of the body armor a familiar pressure on my shoulders. While Leo was closing deals, I was learning how to clear a room, how to react to an ambush, How to distinguish the sound of a threat from the noise of a crowd. My world wasn't quiet or stable, it was a carefully managed state of high alert. A place where a moment's hesitation could have catastrophic consequences. My real office wasn't a cubicle. It was a place Leo and his family could never imagine. A secure, soundproofed room deep, inside a federal building known as a SCIF, a sensitive, compartmented information facility. There are no windows in a SCIF. The only light comes from the cold blue glow of encrypted monitors. In there, I wasn't organizing catering. I was piecing together a puzzle from whispers and shadows, analyzing satellite imagery, cross-referencing surveillance, logs, and interpreting classified intelligence to uncover threats against American diplomats overseas. The work was silent, intense, and carried a weight of responsibility that would have crushed Leo. It was in that silent, sterile room that I earned my respect. I'll never forget the day I brought a finished threat assessment to my boss, Special Agent in Charge Martinez. He was a grizzled veteran, a man who had seen the worst of the world and didn't waste words. He read my report, his face unreadable, his eyes scanning every line of my analysis. He looked up, his gaze direct and serious, and gave a single curt nod. "Good work, Reed," he said, his voice a low gravel. "Your threat matrix is solid. You just averted an international incident." That was it. No fanfare, no toast, just the quiet, profound acknowledgement of a job well done. That single nod from him meant more to me than a lifetime of Diana's performative praise. So why the disconnect? Why the two completely separate lives? The bridge between them was my husband, Leo, and he was the one who kept the narratives apart. He knew the truth about my job, of course. Not the classified details, but he knew the title, the danger, the importance. I confronted him about it one night, after another family dinner where he let his mother refer to my career as that little government thingy. I asked him, my voice tired, why he never corrected them. Why he let them believe I was someone I wasn't. He wouldn't even look at me. He just shrugged, running a hand through his hair. "Babe, it's just easier this way," he said, staring at the television. "My mom, she wouldn't get it. She's from a different generation. Let's just keep it simple, okay?" But in that moment, I saw the truth with stunning clarity. He wasn't protecting his mother's delicate sensibilities. He was protecting his own fragile ego, my quiet competence, the immense and silent responsibility of my real life was a threat to his position as the center of the universe. He needed to be the star, the provider, the one with the important career. And for him to shine his brightest, my light had to be kept under a bushel. He wasn't my partner, he was my gatekeeper. For 5 years I had accepted their version of my life. I thought love meant letting them have their narrative. But in my world, a flawed narrative gets people killed. I decided it was time to apply the rules of my profession to my personal life. Control the facts or the facts will control you. The end of my marriage didn't come with a crash of thunder, but with a quiet, soul-crushing whisper over the phone. I was in the final, most grueling phase of the selection process for the DC assignment, the culmination of my entire career. I'd just come home from a brutal 16-hour day that ended with a mock interrogation panel designed to break even the most seasoned agents. I was exhausted, scraped raw, but filled with a deep, humming sense of exhilaration. I had held my own. I had won. As I walked in, I heard Leo's voice from the living room, light and casual. He was on the phone with Diana. "Yeah, Clara's just swamped with some big office reorganization," he was saying, followed by a dismissive laugh. "You know how government work is. All paperwork and no windows." My blood ran cold. He wasn't just downplaying my work. He was actively erasing it. My ambition, my struggle, my triumph. He saw it all as nothing more than an inconvenience to lie about, a messy detail to be smoothed over for his mother. In that precise moment, something inside me broke for the last time. It wasn't a feeling of sadness. It was the cold, clean click of a switch. The mission was no longer to save my marriage. The mission was now a clean extraction. There was no confrontation. There were no tears. The next morning, I went into operational mode. The pain, the betrayal, I compartmentalized it all, filing it away under non-essential intelligence. My focus narrowed to a single critical objective: secure the DC post. It wasn't just a career move anymore. It was my liberation plan. Every late night I spent studying foreign policy documents. Every grueling morning I pushed myself through. Physical training, Every calculated answer I gave to the final review board, it was all fuel for my escape. I didn't just pass the board. I finished with the highest possible marks. The official notification arrived on a Tuesday, a sterile, encrypted email that held the keys to my entire future. The hard copy orders, printed on heavy, crisp paper with the official state, department seal, were couriered to a private mailbox I'd set up a week later. My birthday was that Saturday. In the days leading up to it, I watched Leo. He was distant, shifty, his phone always angled away from me. I knew what was coming. I could see the shape of their plan forming in the shadows. A public, humiliating ambush. They were going to serve me divorce papers at my own party. I could have left. I could have packed a bag and disappeared before they had the chance. But my training taught me that you never cede the field to your opponent. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted a show of their power. So I decided I would let them have it. On Saturday evening, before leaving for the party, I stood before my mirror. With steady hands, I took the sealed Department of State envelope and tucked it neatly into my purse. I was going to attend my own execution. They had spent weeks plotting my downfall, whispering over phone calls and conspiring over lunches. They thought they were the architects of my fate. They had no idea they were simply walking into a theater I had already prepared. I walked into the party and the air was thick with a smug satisfaction that felt like a physical presence. I was an island, completely isolated in a sea of Diana and Leo's wealthy friends. Their conversations, which flowed like cheap champagne, would halt for a split second when I walked by before resuming with renewed, whispered vigor. Every polite smile felt like an evaluation, every glance a dismissal. They were all in on the joke, and I was the punchline. This wasn't a party. It was a tribunal, and I was the one on trial. I took my seat at the head of the dining table, a place of honor that they had clearly repurposed into a stage for my humiliation. I felt the weight of their collective gaze, a predatory focus waiting for the spectacle to begin. And then, it began. Diana, with the practiced grace of a seasoned performer, gently tapped her glass with a knife. The music faded, and the low chatter died instantly. She rose to her feet, a mask of solemn sincerity plastered on her face. "If I could have everyone's attention," she began, her voice smooth and steady. She launched into a saccharine speech about the sacredness of family, about how sometimes, for the health of the whole, you have to make difficult decisions. She spoke of values and legacy, words that sounded obscene coming from her lips. With all eyes locked on me, she slid a heavy, leather-bound folder across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of me. "From the family," she whispered, her voice a cruel caress that was meant for me alone. "We feel it's for the best." I didn't need to open it. I knew the contents as surely as I knew my own name. Inside were the divorce papers, the official decree of my exile. As if on cue, Leo raised his phone, the camera lens a single dark eye pointed directly at me. "Just want to capture the moment," he said, his voice laced with a thick, feigned sympathy that made my stomach turn. He was waiting for the performance his mother had paid for. He wanted tears. He wanted me to scream, to object, to make a scene that would validate their narrative of me as an unstable, emotional woman. The guests leaned in, their faces a mixture of pity and hungry anticipation. They were vultures, and they smelled blood. They were about to be disappointed. I took a slow, deliberate breath. In my mind, I wasn't in a dining room. I was in an interrogation. Rule 1, control your reaction. I looked at the folder, then at Diana's triumphant face, and then at the phone in my husband's hand. I felt nothing but a profound, chilling calm. They wanted a show. They would not get one from me. I reached for the pen they had so thoughtfully provided. It felt heavy in my hand, not with the weight of defeat, but with the finality of my own liberation. My signature on each page was not shaky or rushed. It was firm, clear, and decisive. I closed the folder, and with a single smooth motion, I slid it back across the table to a stunned Diana. Then, I reached into my purse. The entire room held its breath. My fingers closed around my own envelope. It was crisp and official, a stark contrast to their opulent leather folder. I placed it on the table with a soft, definitive click. "And this," I said, my voice perfectly even and clear, cutting through the suffocating silence, "is from me." For a moment, no one moved. Diana looked at the simple white envelope with confusion. Then annoyance. She snatched it up, her movements jerky and impatient. Leo leaned over her shoulder, a condescending smirk still playing on his lips. She tore it open. Their eyes fell on the first line, on the bold, unmistakable seal of the United States Department of State. The smirk on Leo's face faltered. The condescension in Diana's eyes morphed into confusion. Then, their eyes scanned down the page. They saw my title, Special Agent. The word hung in the air, an impossible fact that didn't compute with their carefully constructed reality of Cubicle Clara. They kept reading, their confusion turning to disbelief. They saw the assignment, a prestigious, high-security position at the Washington, D.C. headquarters. And then they saw the final, world-shattering detail. The required security clearance, top secret, SCI. A level of clearance that signified a trust from the United States government so absolute that all their money, all their influence, all their connections could never even approach it. Diana's face, which had been flushed with victory, drained of all color. It happened in an instant. Her entire worldview, a fragile hierarchy built on money and social influence, was obliterated. The boring admin she had just publicly cast aside was a woman who held a level of federal authority she couldn't even fathom. She hadn't just ended a marriage. She had, in her spectacular arrogance, severed her family's connection to a woman of silent, formidable power. The party turned deathly silent, the only sound the frantic, terrified beating of my own heart, finally free. My husband had spent our entire marriage trying to make me feel small. In the end, all it took was one page for him to finally understand he was the one who had been living in the shallow end. In the ringing silence that followed, I pushed my chair back from the table. The sound scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh, definitive noise in the otherwise frozen room. Every eye was on me, but their stares no longer felt like daggers. They were just empty. I looked at the collection of shocked faces, at Diana's ashen expression, at Leo, slack-jawed disbelief, and I felt nothing but a quiet, clinical detachment. The operation was complete. I stood, smoothed the front of my dress, and looked at them one last time. "Thank you for the party," I said. My voice was even, devoid of any emotion. It wasn't sarcastic. It was just final. I turned and walked away without a backward glance. I didn't rush. My steps were measured and steady as I crossed the cavernous living room, my heels clicking a steady rhythm against their marble floors. I could feel their collective gaze on my back, but I never faltered. I walked past the portraits of Leo's ancestors, past the glass cabinets filled with meaningless trophies and out the heavy oak door into the cool night air. I didn't look back. I was leaving a ghost behind, and I had no interest in watching it fade. Parked at the curb was a sleek black government car, its engine humming quietly. My colleague, Agent Davis, was in the driver's seat. He saw me, and the corner of his mouth ticked up in a small, knowing smile. He rolled down the window. "Ready for DC, Reed?" he asked. I got into the car, the door closing with a solid, satisfying thud, leaving my old life behind in the rearview mirror. 1 year later, the memory of that night feels like a scene from someone else's life. Washington, D.C. is not just where I work, it's where I belong. I am no longer a newcomer finding my footing. I am a leader. My days are spent in a state-of-the-art operations center, a room that pulses with the quiet, focused energy of immense responsibility. Massive screens line one wall, displaying real-time data from every corner of the globe. Here, I'm not explaining myself or fighting to be seen. I'm the one at the head of the briefing table, guiding a team of brilliant, dedicated agents, people who see me for exactly who I am. They don't care about my family connections or my social standing. They care about my analysis, my judgment, and my ability to stay calm under pressure. Our conversations are about mitigating threats and protecting assets, not about promotions and stock portfolios. We share a bond forged in the crucible of our work, a silent understanding that can only exist between people who have chosen a life of service. This is my new family. It's not one I was born into, but one I earned my place in. It's a family built not on dysfunctional obligation, but on a foundation of competence and mutual unconditional respect. Here, in the quiet hum of the servers and the low murmur of classified conversations, I have finally found my peace. That peace was tested one last time, a few weeks ago. I was at my apartment, a quiet, simple space that is entirely my own, looking out over the city lights after a long day. My phone buzzed on the counter with a text from an unsaved number, but I recognized it instantly. It was from Leo. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. I simply felt a flicker of curiosity, the detached curiosity of a historian examining an artifact from a forgotten era. I picked up the phone and read the message. "Clara, I know it's been a while," it began. "My firm is facing a federal inquiry. I don't know who else to ask. They said you might know people who handle this stuff. Can we talk?" I read the words over and over, searching myself for any trace of the old anger, for some spark of vengeful satisfaction. But there was nothing. No triumph, no bitterness, just a quiet, profound sense of distance. He was a stranger, pleading for help from a woman he never knew, the version of me he had worked so hard to erase. The irony was that he was finally acknowledging my power, but only when he needed to use it for himself. His problems, his world, his panic, they were no longer mine to solve. The woman he was texting had ceased to exist a year ago, in a silent dining room filled with stunned faces. I looked at his desperate words one last time, and then, with a single decisive swipe of my thumb, I archived the message. I didn't block him. I didn't reply. I just filed him away, a closed case in the archives of my past. I put the phone down, turned back to the window, and took a deep breath of the cool night air. My future, the one I had built with my own 2 hands, was waiting. They thought a legacy was about the name you carry. I learned it's about the mission you serve. If you've ever had to become your own hero because no one else would, share your story below. In this community, your strength is always recognized.